So that's sort of my view of the world right now. I believe the world's changed a lot, Microsoft has changed a lot, IT has changed a lot, and we'll come back and talk in a moment about how we can all work together to move forward effectively. But I'd like to spend a few moments laying out some guidance for how we can deploy all of this stuff effectively. And this guidance is based on something that I stood on stage last year with Christian Buckley and said. So many of you will have seen this before, and that is that SharePoint doesn't matter, business matters. In the end, it's really about not the technology, but about people trying to get things done. Business business has its purpose because people create demand. Business is created by people to deliver on that demand. And so business really matters. Sorry, I'm having a problem with my build there. Business does matter, and people matter even more. So SharePoint doesn't matter, Office 365 doesn't matter, the cloud doesn't matter, even IT doesn't matter. What really matters is the business and the fact that it's trying to achieve objectives that either increase value or decrease risk. So if IT now puts itself in the position of increasing value or decreasing risk, we're now going to be aligned with the business in a way that makes us, gives us a seat at the table that we haven't had before. So with that as a foundation, how can we, from a logistical and tactical perspective, start moving forward into this new world? Sorry, that slide is, something is wrong with my deck there. Give me 1 second, this is kind of weird. Let's see what happened here. Wow, that was really weird. I apologize. Let me jump back in here. So as I mentioned, I want to talk about some tactical things and the way I'm going to address these tactics is by answering some common questions that I get from customers. Starting with, why should I consider SharePoint 2013? About half of you said you're still in SharePoint 2010. And for those of you in that boat, why would you even want to think about SharePoint 2013? Well, to answer that question, I'd like to take a step back into ancient history, into about the year 2006. In the year 2006, Microsoft released Microsoft Office SharePoint Server 2007 and Windows SharePoint Services version 3. That was in September of 2006 that went RTM. And at that time, Microsoft then turned its team's attention towards planning what would be the next version of SharePoint, which would end up being SharePoint 2010. So it was in 2006 that Microsoft started planning for SharePoint 2010. Now let's think about the rest of the world outside Microsoft in the same year. What was this in 2006? Not even accessible. You had to be a student. If you weren't a student, you would never even have heard of Facebook. And what about this thing that certainly changed the face of technology? Not released until summer of 2007. So in other words, it was in a pre-Facebook, pre-iPhone world that Microsoft designed SharePoint 2010. And SharePoint 2010 is a great product. The problem is it was a great product for the world as it was in 2006. And as we've already laid out, the ensuing set of years changed things significantly. New ways, new understandings, new relationships between people and technology, new devices, new ways of connecting, new challenges and new opportunities in the cloud and in control. The world changed a lot. And so it is the new world that influenced the design of SharePoint 2013 and the current versions of Office 365. And so to sort of put this all into a nutshell, geez Louise, I think I had a little file corruption. So that's still the wrong one. Okay, yeah, there we go. So in considering SharePoint 2013 and SharePoint 2010, it's important to realize that SharePoint 2010 is really so 2006. It's simply a product that was well built for a world that we no longer live in. And most of us have to think about mobile access and cross-browser support and things that we simply didn't have to worry about in 2006. So there's a good reason to move forward to SharePoint 2013, but then the next question becomes, should you actually upgrade? Should you take your SharePoint 2010 environment and upgrade it to SharePoint 2013? My advice here might surprise you, and that is don't upgrade. Instead, think about moving forward. Now the idea here is that your business has objectives that it's trying to achieve, and where IT needs to be is delivering those objectives that increase value and decrease risk. And so as the business needs new things, as it comes to and says, we need X, that's the opportunity to say, what can SharePoint do? And put those use cases into the appropriate version of SharePoint. So we're really talking about moving forward based on use cases, where there's something we can do that increases value or decreases risk, and then putting it on the appropriate platform, rather than doing a massive migration project. Some of my customers, some of my bigger customers have had the opportunity to do things that many of us probably wish we could have, and that is to look at their history of what they've done with IT. And one of the interesting takeaways is that organizations who've actually looked at their history have found that a big upgrade projects really delivered little or no value. This quote came from a leader of one of the biggest banks in the world. He told me this directly. It's like, we just don't believe in upgrade anymore. It hasn't given us the value we need. In fact, in many cases, a big upgrade project, it actually reduced value because it took IT's attention away from things that were more important, and it increased risk because things broke along the way. So rather than a big upgrade project, we think about a use case-based evolution and moving forward in our adoption of new technologies. And then over time, migrating. That is, taking things from the old environment and bringing them forward. But only doing that when either bringing it forward will increase value demonstrably or decrease risk demonstrably. And that is going to happen at some point. There will be a need to migrate, but it will be when support for SharePoint 2010 starts to be phased out, which is still several years away. So there'll be a time when the risk of simply having it on the old platform is too high, for sure. But it's about doing it for business reasons rather than doing it just because there's a new technology that we should upgrade to. So don't upgrade, migrate, move forward, and then migrate over time. Now, when should you start doing this? I really believe you should not wait. You should start doing this now. Start moving forward. Because in the past, there has been this culture of waiting for the next service pack. Now, obviously, we have Service Pack 1 for SharePoint 2013, but the whole reason we waited for service packs in the past doesn't apply anymore. We waited for service packs because the RTM version of the product had not really been tested enough. That was the perception in the community. And that simply isn't true anymore. Microsoft has used the current version of SharePoint with hundreds of millions of customers before we even have the opportunity to put it on place on premise. So service packs don't mean what they used to. And in fact, service packs, as we saw with Service Pack 1, are now introducing new features, like the Yammer integration and the OneDrive integration. So what are you going to do? Wait for the service pack to the service pack to apply the service pack? Doesn't make sense. We're now in a rolling, iterative world, and we need to understand that the quality of the product is actually really solid because it's tested better than it's ever been tested before in the real world with hundreds of millions of customers. But even more than the technical reason for not waiting is the business reason for not waiting. Because you shouldn't wait because your business won't wait. As we said, if your business sees you as unresponsive, they'll simply find another solution and you'll end up being left in the dust. So with those foundations, here's some tactical guidance for moving forward into the new hybrid world. Let's assume you're on 2010, and if you're in 2007, we'll talk about that in a moment. But let's assume you're in 2010, you've got a 2010 environment running on premise, and you have some use cases, some workloads running in that environment. You have an intranet, you have some team sites, you have a line of business application. Great, life is perfect. Don't wait to put the new version of the product in place. Get 2013 in place in your environment so that you're ready for the business when it has use cases. Now, what can you do while you wait for the business to come to you with use cases? Well, if you've got 2013 in place, you can and probably should consider putting some of your services on your 2013 environment, specifically search, metadata, user profile, and BCS. Those 4 services can be published down to your 2010 environment, so they can consume the services from the 2013 farm. And that means you've got a well-managed, clean service farm that can take advantage of all the IT features of the services in 2013. Now your 2010 farm won't have any new features. Nothing new will appear. There won't be any magic new functionality because 2010 still behaves as it used to. It's just consuming the services from 2013. If you want to take advantage of the new features of 2013, one thing you might do in this progression is say, well, we've now got this farm running. We've got search in it. Why not actually put the Enterprise Search Center up there? And then, if the users are searching the enterprise from the Search Center in 2013, you're getting all the amazing new features that they built into SharePoint Search. And SharePoint Search is definitely one of the big wins for 2013. The functionality is incredible, the scalability is amazing, and so now your users take advantage of that. Maybe you will start doing your My Sites in 2013 if you hadn't done them in 2010 yet. Or you move them to 2013 because now you can do OneDrive and get the user's data up into OneDrive for Business. So now you're actually starting to deliver business value on top of this new platform. Life is good. Maybe the next step is to actually think about starting to move into the cloud. Look at what you can do with Windows Azure from an IaaS perspective. Do you want to maybe put some of your workloads into the cloud or prepare for that? Do you want to set up some dev environments in the cloud? Do you want to at least understand how to create an IaaS infrastructure for your organization in the cloud? Get it ready before your business needs it. And same with Office 365. If you haven't started, get your tenancy established. Do the research with the Fast Track program to figure out what it takes to get your Active Directory synchronizing correctly to the cloud. And do that research, because at some point the business is going to come to you with new workloads. And you don't want to be the one who says, I can't support your new workload because it's going to take me 6 months to figure out how to use these new products. You need to have them in place so then you can take those new workloads and put it on-premise if it makes sense, put it in IaaS if it makes sense, put it in 365 if it makes sense. And then last but not least, some of the big workloads that we're all discussing, business intelligence and social, you really should think about, and we'll talk more about this in a moment as well, you really should think about putting those in the cloud because that's where the functionality is going to live. Mark and Christian will be talking about social tomorrow. We've got another presentation on business intelligence later in the week. And in effect, you're going to be given by far the greatest value by putting those into Office 365. So this is one approach to moving forward thoughtfully, and it all boils down to not waiting. Getting these new platforms and services in place so that when the business comes to you with a use case, you're able to respond with the most appropriate platform for them. Now, what about if you have 2007? If you have 2007, should you go to 2010 or should you just skip it and go to 2013? This answer is a really easy one, and I like to draw it out in a diagram. I call it my SharePoint 2010-2013 workload decision tree. And the idea here is, again, you take a look at what the business is really trying to do. You define the business need, and then you ask, can it be done in SharePoint 2010? And if the answer is yes, it can be done better in 2013, so put it in 2013. Now that sounds a little flip, but it's actually true. I have not yet run into a situation where a customer said that they could do something in 2010 and it just simply didn't work in 2013. Now that's not to say that 2013 doesn't have some rough edges. It does. You know, we all understand the discussion about on-premise social versus Yammer. We understand the challenges with the app model. There are some rough edges, but those are with net new things that you wouldn't have been able to do in 2010 anyway. So if you can do it in 2010, you can do it better in 2013, and yes, you should skip it. If it can't be done in 2010, then maybe it can be done in 2013, and if not, you might need to go look at another product. Now this is a flow chart that even my boss can understand. So this is something you can use to help communicate to the folks above you. Now, should you actually migrate to the cloud? Again, I don't believe you should migrate just for the sake of migrating. Same advice as upgrading. Move forward. Take a look at the use cases, figure out where there's going to be increased value or decreased risk in the cloud, and if the cloud service can deliver that increased value or decreased risk, put it there. But don't migrate. Move forward. Over time, yes, you will migrate. There will be opportunities where you can increase value or decrease risk by taking a workload and moving it into the cloud. And Microsoft is starting to show us some of those things. OneDrive for Business. Take a workload that used to be on-premise in your My Sites or your file shares, get it up to the cloud. Huge value. Lower risk with the Fort Knox security and the kinds of things Microsoft is doing there. And more use cases will be coming out, and we'll see some of them tomorrow from Mark and Christian, that you start going, oh wow, the cloud really can do some amazing things that I never will be able to do on-premise. So that, you know, let's take these old use cases, move them into the cloud to increase that value. When should you begin moving to the cloud? Again, don't wait because the business is going to wait. And don't get caught off guard. A lot of this is about IT getting ahead of the business for the first time in several years. And you need to get ahead. And as you do that, you need to think about use cases and which clouds are appropriate for each use case. So there's several flavors of cloud, right? There's software as a service, which in the Microsoft world is represented by Office 365. We already know a lot, and we're seeing a lot this week about Office 365 and its capabilities, and we now know that Microsoft is cloud first. So all the new functionality, all the new features are going into the cloud first, and maybe we will get some of them on-premise with the next on-premise version of SharePoint. Then there's also hosted infrastructure as a service, which is Windows Azure, or managed infrastructure as a service with players like FP Web or Rackspace. And in those cases, you've got more, you've got different capabilities, different pros and cons. Then there's the private cloud, which of course is your on-premise environment where you're running SharePoint. And now Microsoft is finally starting to expose some of the platform as a service capabilities of Office 365 for developers to use, the new APIs for calendars and contacts and groups and storage and sharing. Also keep in mind that Microsoft is not the only cloud player. There's lots of other options out there. So there's Amazon and Google, and you see the whole list, and there's more. And the interesting thing is this slide, you might think Microsoft won't like Dan showing this slide. Microsoft asked me to show this slide. They said, please tell people one thing: don't drink the Kool-Aid. They said, yes, we want you in Office 365. We're going to do everything we can to make it worth it, to make it valuable, to make it a no-brainer. But there are other choices. And there'll be times when a cloud service has a feature today or a capability that you can't get from Microsoft. That's okay. As long as you know why you chose that service, so that when it is available in Office 365 or Azure or one of Microsoft's clouds, you can move it back in there, because the integrated capabilities that Microsoft is delivering through its cloud services is going to be something that other providers are probably not going to be able to beat. And that's, in the history of Microsoft's existence, as many of us know, that's been how Microsoft worked on-premise. Microsoft was not always the most feature-rich platform for a specific business solution on-premise, but many of us went with it because it fit so well together. And as a whole, it lowered costs and increased productivity. That's now happening in the cloud as well. So today there may be a feature that's available in Dropbox that isn't available in OneDrive. Automatic synchronization of files shared with you from other people. That doesn't mean it's not going to appear in OneDrive very, very soon. And if it's a salient business driver that you have to have that feature, you have choice. So what you end up with is a very hybrid environment. Not just hybrid of on-premise and cloud and various flavors of cloud, but hybrid of underlying services. And what becomes important as an IT organization is that you're able to understand and leverage as many of these services as possible, so you're not having to build and manage expensive infrastructure on-premise where you don't have to. And then, more importantly, that you abstract the complexity of those services to your business. Because your business doesn't care about SharePoint. How many of you would say that in your business, very few people could actually tell you what SharePoint is? If you ask your users what SharePoint is, could they tell you? Like, really? Yeah, I think most of you are probably lying. I can't explain what SharePoint is. People don't know or care whether it's SharePoint or whatever it is. They care that they're getting their job done. They care that they can store files and share them with people. They care that they can have conversations. They care that they can communicate. They care that they can collaborate. Those are the things they need. And as IT organizations move into this new world of being a center of excellence, what we need to be providing to our businesses are the services, not the technologies. We need to be providing file sharing and conversations and calendaring and contacts and all of these kinds of things, regardless of what the underlying platform is today. So some of these services may be hosted on a non-Microsoft platform today, but it might be tomorrow we're able to put them on Microsoft. And if IT can get in that business of abstracting the service from the environment and the technology, abstracting the business-facing service, IT will be doing itself a world of good. So how can you plan effectively? Some of these questions that I'm asking actually come from me asking Microsoft people and other people in the industry, if you could tell 1,400 people in Barcelona one thing, what would that be? And one of the interesting answers I got from one of the Microsoft product team is people need to understand long-term planning is dead. It used to be that CIOs were being asked to create 5-year plans and to commit to platforms. And in some cases, CIOs still are being asked to do that, but the reality is long-term planning is dead. You cannot guess what technology is going to be in 5 years. You can see the trajectory, but you cannot really understand what's going to happen. Who would have thought in 2014 that Microsoft would be giving us devices and services as rich as they are today 5 years ago? No one other than maybe a few people at Microsoft would have even had a clue that that was happening. So instead of committing to long-term platforms, you need to strategize how your IT organization is going to innovate and respond to the business. That's where you need to be. Now, as far as committing to platforms go, Microsoft's trajectory and history certainly make it a best bet. Its existing capabilities, what they're showing us about their roadmap and their future, certainly make it a best bet. So if you can do what you really need to do today on Microsoft's platforms, you should be going there and starting to identify what are the things you really need versus the things you'd like to have. And if there's a few things that you'd like to have that Microsoft doesn't have today, I would probably still commit to the Microsoft platform because I know where it's going. And just to give you an example of one of Microsoft's competitors, Amazon. Amazon Web Services and Amazon's cloud, the biggest cloud in the world, obviously. One of the interesting statistics about Amazon is well over 90% of its cloud is Linux. Very little of its business is actually running Windows infrastructure on Amazon Cloud. Now, it's still huge, and it still has a lot of great features, but Microsoft's clouds are clearly at or very close to passing it, and will go way past it in the future. And at the point that Microsoft's capabilities pass Amazon's, there isn't a lot of business driver for Amazon to catch up at that point in time, because it's only a single-digit portion of its business that's actually hosting Windows infrastructure. So we need to really understand how all these players work together, and if we are in fact seeing value on the Microsoft platforms, we need to understand that where they are weak today, they are catching up, and once they catch up, no one is going to be able to pass them. And that's an important dynamic.